convention on Tuesday in person. We had another event about how to make genuine connections on Monday, and tomorrow you'll be seeing something else pop through on the socials. So this is an idea to really bring together and celebrate the connections that we're convening through Agri TechE. Now, agritech is nothing without farmers. So today's event is all about how to innovate with and for farmers. And we very deliberately chose that title because, as I said, there is absolutely no point in all these fantastic innovations and this wonderful research being done if it's not ending up in the hands of those who are the ultimate end users of it. So what we'll be talking about today is some tips and insights, some experiences from those across the ecosystem about working with and for farmers. And we also have some farmers on the call as well. So we really hope to hear from you as well. Now, obviously, the government knows about the importance of farmer adoption being at the heart of all of this. We have the Adopt programme pending, which was announced by the Secretary of State at the NFU conference last week. And there is lots of discussion. This is something that has exercised everybody for a long time. Is adoption, and is even adoption the right word, of new technologies by farmers? Is it as effective and efficient as it could be? Are expectations aligned? All of the kind of challenges of collaboration, we're hoping to unpack those a little bit in the next 90 minutes. Now, I'd like you to, I think everybody mostly has their cameras off. We will be recording this session, and if you'd like to ask a question, if you could maybe type it into the chat, or when we've heard from our three speakers, raise your hand and I'll try and keep a track of everything, and I'll come over to you to ask your question in person if you'd prefer to do that. Now, to sort of get the ball rolling around who's on the call, but maybe I could invite you to take part in a poll. And it's one of the things that we'd like to sort of just to warm you all up, is to start thinking about how farmers and innovators can work more effectively together. And so hopefully on your screen now you should see a question: how involved should farmers be in the development of new agricultural technologies? And you have 5 options there, and you can tick as many or as few as you like. So can I invite you to now just do your vote now? And we should see, by the power of technology, we should see that the results start to feed in. I'm now clicking on mine. Are you all clicking on yours? We had a conversation at the Challenge Convention about at what point should the farmers actually become engaged in the research process and the R&D process. And some people were saying they need to be there right at the beginning, talking to the researchers that are doing fundamental science. And others were saying, no, that's a little bit too early. Shouldn't be that they shouldn't be involved at that stage. That needs to stay within the realms of sort of strategic research priorities. So just looking now, we seem to have a couple of winners about collaborating with researchers once the companies, once the ideas are in development, hosting trials. But there's still leading the process from the beginning. So there's some people who are still thinking that that's an important and relevant thing to be doing. Okay. I think that's probably the poll done. So Christina, maybe if we could lose the poll, thank you so much. And now to just try and help, this is Connections Week after all, and you might want to make some connections. So over the course of the next 5 minutes or so, could I invite you to maybe put your, just introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, what role you play in the innovation ecosystem for agri-tech and agriculture. And maybe that way we can get to know each other a little bit better, and you can then perhaps find some people that you might want to follow up with. Okay, so I will leave you to start introducing yourself to each other. And in the meantime, it is my great pleasure to introduce the first of our 3 speakers this afternoon. We'll hear from our 3 speakers, and then we'll have a panel session. So please do keep posting your questions in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on them and ask them when we come together in plenary at the end when we've heard from our 3 speakers. So our first speaker, we're trying to, as I said, take some sort of different dimensions and perspectives from those who do work with farmers. And so our first speaker is David Clarke, no relation, in case you think there's been nominative preference. David is the Soils and Farming Specialist at NIAB with a long history and experience in working with farmers. So David, I will go dark and silent. Can I invite you in? And perhaps if you can share your screen, and we look forward to hearing from you. So David, over to you, please.
Thank you, Belinda. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see my slides.
We can, thank you.
Great. So Belinda said, I'm David Clarke. I'm a Soils and Farming Systems Specialist at NIAB, based at Morley in Norfolk in the east. And I'm going to share some quite sort of my personal opinions around this, not just, some other colleagues in NIAB might have differing views. So this is sort of how I've interacted with farmers in the research I'm doing, but also a wider overview of how NIAB interacts with farmers on a daily basis. Hopefully that can move on. So I thought I'd just start, as I was preparing for this talk, I've come across some examples of where we potentially didn't innovate very well, or the innovation was successful but then never went to market, and the lessons we could learn from that. And one of the best I could come up with was from the keyboard. So obviously everyone hopefully today has got one of these in front of them. I didn't realize until I looked that it's called a QWERTY keyboard, because that's the first few letters you get up on there, and that was developed in the 1900s as just a sort of rudimentary keyboard. But actually in the 30s, someone realized this isn't a very efficient way of using the English language in a keyboard, and created what's the Dvorak keyboard, which has been shown in experiments to be about 4 to 10% more efficient than the old keyboard. But in the 1930s, keyboards weren't that important. There was only very few of them. So typists and people using them thought, well, actually, we're quite comfortable doing what we do, so we won't bother. They didn't see what was going to happen, and now there's over 2 billion keyboards in the world. We all own one ourselves. And actually, if we think about how important that efficiency saving may have accumulated over time, maybe that was a bad decision on their part, or the inventor and the innovation didn't have a suitable route to market and didn't have that sort of research distribution that it needed. And obviously, one of the famous ones from farming is Gregor Mendel's experiments on hybridization with peas in the late 19th century. Obviously observed that, but did a really poor job of showing people this. He published in a journal that no one read. He wasn't very good at talking to scientists. It didn't explain his work very well. And also really couldn't understand and explain the science behind it. So it made people doubt what he was seeing. And, this was a time when agricultural research was just getting going and starting to explode with sort of the classical experiments. So actually that information may have been value and might have allowed us to make some of these discoveries much earlier than we did. And finally, in the early 20th century, did they become available. So we need to sort of make sure that innovation itself isn't enough. We need to make sure that our innovation is actually felt in the real world and gets onto farms. So today I'm just going to sort of go over NIAB's place and model to facilitate innovation and how we support innovative farmers. Talk about NIAB membership very briefly and how we see that as an important way for innovation to find its way on farm. We also very briefly going to talk about actually, just as farmers as facilitators, it was in that poll there, hosting trials, how as researchers to interact with farmers in that way, but also make sure these trials run smoothly. So I'll share some real world examples of that. And then some work that I've been doing and more focus on what I do is actually how we help farmers carry out experiments on farm to innovate and to understand their systems and then make better farming systems. And that's from an AHDE project we have at the farm at Morley here. So for those of you not familiar, NIAB, we have our headquarters in Cambridge. We also have a East Malling R&D centre looking at horticulture. These are our own sites. But we also have 13 regional field trial centres across the country, and most of these, if not all, are actually on host farms. So we work with the farmers to deliver our experiments on these trials. We don't own the land, we don't manage the land. And we also have some off-site trials sites around these centres. So actually, we've got over 100 field stations across the UK, all having to work with farmers to help deliver the experiments we want. The breadth of these experiments it varies greatly from sort of high-level genetics experiments looking at physiology and crop transformation that potentially isn't of interest to the farmer in that specific time, but actually they can help facilitate that work, all the way through to some of the work that we do for the membership and ourselves in the farming systems team that are a bit more applied on-farm research that has actionable results that can be used by farmers. Some of those examples I'll talk about today. So I've just kind of made this as a quite a crude how I see it. So if we think about industry innovation in the middle there, there's a famous paper in agriculture about how we as researchers should work with farmers and work with the industry to get our innovations into market. And it says there that innovation emerges from the interactions among these multiple actors, fostering combined technical, social and institutional change. If we think of the example of the keyboard, a really good technical innovation, but obviously lacked the social and institutional innovation needed to get that to market. So we have to cover all of those in one fell swoop when we create these innovations or new farming systems. So at the broad level, the facilitation is how we interact with a lot of our farmers, which just provide the land for the experiments to facilitate the husbandry. So they might do the sprays and the land work on these experiments, but actually have little input onto what we're experimenting, all the way through to how we innovate with farmers. And this is actually a much larger part of the work that NIAB does, and certainly I do, is working together on these shared interests, improving farming practice, whether that's yields, management, both at margins, both of them, or just environmental outcomes. And we do this through our membership. We are involved in a couple of strategic farms for AHDB. We also have a number of collaborative projects through Innovate UK. Belinda meant the forthcoming Adopt programme. Hopefully that will provide new opportunities, but then also commercial partners and farms come to us and say we want to try this out, but we need a bit more research experience and help to do that. So we have a number of those projects. I'm going to focus on the membership and then just one example from the strategic farm today. So NIAB membership, if we think about our farmers there, we have about 2,000 plus farmers plus advisory members that form the hub and key sort of key group of our membership. But within that, we have these technical committees. There's not 4, I think there's a bit more than that, but these are sort of groups within those farmers that are really keen to push what research is done by us and that help and what they feel they need to know on farm to make those changes and get that innovation onto farm. So they report this back to our specialists, myself and a number of colleagues, the regional agronomists. We have a number of regional agronomists that work within these regions. And then from that, individual members can also contact direct to those and request what they feel they need to know or lacking in information. And from that, we develop a national trials program, which can vary between sort of up to 40 individual trials each year, looking at various fertilizer applications, fungicides, new products, soil management, varies across many different realms of the systems. And then we report these back famously at our open days and the large cereals events, groundswell, those sort of things, but also through technical reports. There's a big annual update report that goes out to farmers. But then also we use our agronomists and our specialists to synthesize this into strategies. So how we interpret this data and how we feel that this could best be used on farm. And we also have our professional development groups that are within these members that then interact with this data and interact with this knowledge and interact with other work that's going on at NIAB a bit more intimately through days and events. So it's quite a nice loop of how we can get farmers can tell us the things that they feel like they need to innovation on, and we can help them achieve that through the research program. There's also a direct path from the innovators. So if someone's got a new product or a new technology that they feel could have value, they can add this to the trials program. Fungicides is a really easy example, but obviously not limited to. If they feel they've created something that's better than all the products that we're currently testing, they can get it entered into our trials program and we can test it for them and then report back to members. And if it does what it says on the tin, obviously the farmer members can use that advice and potentially use that product. Bit of a shameless plug. Very briefly, I'd get told off from my powers to be if I didn't. There is the 90-day free trial for membership. If you're interested in understanding what the membership offers, you can scan that QR code and get a 90-day free tester and see all the trials results from last year's and previous years and so on. So I'm going to just go over some examples. I think one thing I didn't realize until I started doing my own research is actually how having a network of farmers, not from a farming background, that I'm friends with has helped quite a lot. And I've put there in their machinery and equipment. And it wasn't only recently that this really, I felt value in it. As I was finishing my PhD, I was calibrating a crop model. And to do that, we needed stone content all the way down the soil profile, because in Norfolk, there's quite high stone content, affects the available water capacity quite drastically. So supervisors like, well, if you're going to have to dig down to 90 centimeters, collect 5 kilos of soil across all these 35 sites and sieve it. And I was like, well, I don't think I can do that. I'm not going to take me hours. But fortunately, farmers came to the rescue. As I mentioned it to a couple of them, one said, well, we've got a digger. I don't mind digging down a hole and you can just scoop out 5 kilos of soil. Another farmer said, oh, I don't have a digger, but I do have a post hole borer. That might work. And it did. So, without the farmers themselves weren't directly involved or benefiting from this research currently, but they were more than happy to facilitate me with that work. And that was a really valuable sort of interaction that we had. A lot of our work and my work specifically goes at Morley, and this is quite an interesting sort of facilitator of innovation. They fund research primarily through the foundation. They fund a lot of NIAB work, but also help BBRO and John Innes and other organisations carry out agricultural research, and also fund PhD students and university projects. But fundamental to that, they've just an 800-hectare farm that is available to the right projects and to, if people approach them correctly, to potentially use for testing their research ideas out. And NIAB are fortunate to have a host site here, and we have about 20 hectares of field trials on the farm. Now, these aren't necessarily anything to do with the foundation. They may be commercial projects, they may be membership projects, they may be some of NIAB's own work. But we have to situate them on the farm and work around the farm's machinery. And we have quite a nice system in play to do that. And I think it was worth mentioning that we've certainly seen, being on site, how some people can potentially not work with the farm very well, and how it can cause issues and cause problems with the experimental setup and experimental design if that communication with the farmers about what you're trying to achieve, how you're going to do it, and how you would like the farm to manage it isn't set out early on. Problems can arise quite quickly. So one thing we do at Morley, and it was kind of developed through talking with the farmer and NIAB themselves, is have a flag system. I didn't have time to go out and take a load of photos of our trials this year with the flags in it. It's not something we've, as I was going through the archive, take a lot of photos of. So we've had to improvise with some corner flags I found online. But we have a colour system that basically tells the spray operators as they get to a trial in a field what we expect them or them not to do. So, for example, if they see a blue flag, they know not to apply any fertilizer. They see a red flag, they know no herbicide, an orange flag, PGR, and a yellow flag, no fungicide. And we give them a really clear map when they get to the trials. I say really clear, it obviously looks very complex, but as you get used to them, they become a bit more clearer. And we make sure then that all these trials don't have or do have the things they require, and then we can impose our treatments on top of it. So having these systems in place as you work with farms as researchers is important, and also from early on making sure there's a protocol, the farm understands what you want from them as researchers, and also that makes it life as easy as possible for them, particularly if they're not being compensated for the work they're doing. So obviously that's one set of sort of facilitation that farms help with our research. So that's the individual plot experiments that are, hopefully will directly impact them down the line, but may not be something they're specifically interested in or have a drastic need for on their farm. Whereas a lot of the work I do is looking at how farms test their own things, their own ideas on farm, or test products, or test fertilizer, or test new technology through tramlines or split field trials. Now, there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. The difficulty is getting enough data from these trials that can give you a reasonable idea of the conclusions or the hypothesis you're trying to test. Obviously, the small plot work is extremely expensive, but is pretty low levels of uncertainty in the results through the replication and the block trials. And through our membership, we spread over a number of sites to see how season and climate affects those results. Obviously, split field trials are much cheaper, but have a much higher increase of uncertainty, as you may only be testing in 2 or 3 reps on one site. So I'm going to focus on how we've been working on improving some of that, certainly at Morley and through the AHT strategic farm work. But also, I'm going to show you a sort of best example I've ever come across of how to do split field trials well. It's come from France, and they, INRA, a few years ago now, probably 10 years ago, were looking at companion cropping oilseed rape with spring beans. And we're finding on individual plots that sometimes they'd see a response, sometimes they wouldn't, and felt that actually they needed a much broader national testing of this feasibility of this innovation, if you want to call it that. So set up 79 very simple pre-treatment tramline trials across 79 farms in France. So effectively the cost was very low, a bit of spring bean if they weren't growing it. The farms had a plan to stick to, they sent it in, and then they sent back yield map data. But from that, they got a really strong data set. You know, on an individual farm, that data set's pretty weak. But as you build that 79 data sets together, they could pick out a really quite a strong picture that where they had oilseed rape with the intercrop spring beans, yields were pretty much higher in 90% of all the cases. And in some of those, they asked them to reduce their nitrogen rate. And you can see, because they're sitting above that 1.1 line, that actually they still yield higher with a reduction in the nitrogen rate. So it provided growers in the region quite strong evidence that actually this is probably an innovation that's worth adopting on farm, and subsequently that was adopted quite widely across France. Excuse me. Now, I haven't had the luxury of doing such a similar sort of work as that yet, but what we've been doing at Morley is looking at specific problems that the farm has, or specific questions the farm has, and trying to address that in a structured way with quite little input from myself and the research team, but allowing the farm to test these hypotheses themselves. There's the few work packages in the AHP strategic farm looking at IPM, so using models for insecticide use, grass weed management, but the work package I'm primarily focused on is looking at nitrogen, as we had the issues in early 2020s with the war in Ukraine, the price hikes. Farms started to look at reducing their nitrogen rate. You can see the national average there in the blue dotted lines. It started to decrease, and the bars are what was applied at Morley, and the farm started to, felt those same pressures. But to do that, they also looked at an alternative product, a polymer urea nitrogen product that's applied as a final end dose in May, beginning of May, end of April, as a foliar applied product. So the idea being that you're applying to the leaf, you're taking out some of the limitations of late applied soil end, it's going direct to the plant, and therefore you increase the efficiency. This is how it's sold. Unfortunately, the farm was seeing that grain protein contents across the farm were much lower over those 2 years, although known due to seasonal variation, hard to pinpoint a yield drop. But they wanted to test that this product was doing exactly what it said on the tin. So we helped set up some experiments to do that. Sorry, I should have put them on earlier. So the rationale, first of all, to understand why we wanted to do something different, obviously what was wrong with the final soil applied N compared to the foliar applied N, was that effectively these are the 3 N timings on average across the farm. So you've got your first split around about now, your second split, which is your large split at the beginning of April. And then this final top-up dose was the one that we're investigating. And the idea being that this tends to be the most inefficient of the doses. It's a top up that if the crop needs it, it can use. But also, as we think about we're getting into early May, we've shown that soil moisture potentially could be limiting at this period, and therefore uptake might be lower. And we've got data from Morley to show this. This is the soil moisture content over the last 10 years from the weather station we have on site. And you can see that generally as our crops taking up moisture, our evapotranspiration is increasing. As we get to that third end timing, our soil moisture is decreasing to a point where it's, at its lowest in July and August. So potentially, that end we're applying to the soil may not be getting into the crop as effectively as we want. I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but we did some modelling work that sort of showed this. We use a crop model to show that effectively that third end timing, the efficiency was estimated to be around about 50% compared to sort of 80% in that second timing. So there is rationale to that maybe we should be doing something different. The question was whether this foliar applied product was the right thing compared to the soil applied end. Skip that. So before we set up the experiment, we obviously knew that the responses are going to be small based on the modelling work. We knew we needed to look at any of the data within the context of season. So we wanted something to explain the results, and we knew soil moisture was probably going to do that. And we also wanted to know what our hypothesis was and how are we going to test it against a control. And these are all things that should be thought about when setting up experiments on farm. We also know that the spatial variation across the farms large. It is across most of East Anglia with how the soils were formed. So we needed to make sure we accounted for that. And just setting up 2 or 3 tram lines with different treatments isn't going to give us the response that we wanted. So we identified some fields that had limited variation. We used soil electrical conductivity scans to do this. And they're a really useful tool along with yield maps to identify fields that may be best for testing these innovations and these ideas. So you can see on the field, the left there, some variation, but much less than some other fields. So we looked at that field. We also set up our controls, and here we actually had 2 controls. The first control was what farm standard was traditionally, which is our 38 kilograms of soil applied N in late May. The alternative product, which is the MZ28 at the same timing, which is effectively matching what is advertised, that nitrogen dose. But then also a true control, which is actually testing if either of those things are giving a response over untreated. So that's untreated. It's not a true untreated. It had nitrogen as you would up to timings 1 and 2, but no third end timing. So we had 2 controls there, our farm standard in green, and then a true control in untreated, and we replicated that 3 times. Ideally, you'd have a few more replications with only 3 treatments, but to fit within the field and to fit within what the farm could manage, we decided that's probably enough, and we're actually replicating it over years to get a much stronger data set that can allow us to put some statistics on it. Other tools that we can use, so we use, this is Yara's at-farm satellite data that showed effectively before we did our treatment, so in middle of April, that actually the treatment area is pretty uniform before we did anything. This was the satellite nitrogen uptake, and it estimated on average about 59 kilos of nitrogen taken up to that point. So we knew there wasn't massive inherent variation in crop growth at the time of treatment effect. Now, if we'd seen big variation there, then ultimately we may have looked for a different field, because that's going to impact how our results and how our conclusions can be made. We also took some photos, because obviously it's important to show that what we're seeing is true, that we had reasonably uniform crop establishment. And the farmer got on with the treatments, did the yield. We had these 12-meter strips, cut the middle. It was a bit of faff instead of just combining it normal and then looking at the yield map. But by doing these individual swaths down the middle, we could do the farm wanted to do some weigh-bin calibration of the yield map data. So not just relying on the data you get off the yield map, but also actual grain weights based off of what was recorded from those plots. They also sent a sample to the lab. They also had a weigh cell there that was originally for sheep, I think, but they could fill this bucket with grain and weigh individual treatments.
Couple of minutes, please, David. Couple of minutes.
Last slide. So the results aren't so much important, but it was more the method they used to get to that. But they showed that they gave us a rep yield for every rep, and they looked at the combine yield and the weighed yield, and we showed that the combine yield was very similar to the weigh yield, but it's just reiterates and has higher confidence in the data they're looking at by doing those two different ways of getting a yield. And ultimately, they saw that actually from the 40 kilograms of soil applied N, we saw about a 0.3 tonne increase over the MZ28 and untreated. So over the 1 year's data, they're going to repeat this over 3 or 4 years to see actually long term, is this innovation going to be beneficial on farm, or are we better off with what we've been doing previously? One reason, this is the last slide, the one reason that it's important to collect data that might explain that. Obviously, that increase was bigger than we'd seen from the model results, but you can see the long-term soil moisture there and last year's soil moisture, and you can see actually around that third end timing and after that third end timing, soil moisture was high pretty much all of last season. Therefore, we would expect soil applied N to potentially have a better uptake. So actually in future years, we might start to see some of these alternative products where they're advertised to do on those lower soil moistures, potentially doing the benefit they can.
David, have you gone? Okay, I think that was the end of David's presentation. I hope you didn't fall off a cliff or have a sudden power cut, David, but thank you so much for that. I'm going to carry on. Thank you. Hopefully we can get you back for the panel session. So really, I think what your presentation has demonstrated is the heroic detail that goes into planning and preparing these kinds of field trials. I have a background in working in the lab, and it really is very different when you get out into the field. So we're going to move on now to a speaker who is has developed some hardware, some robotics, and James Miller, who's the chief executive of Earth Rover, has a history and a lot of experience in deploying these really tricky beasts. If we think Mother Nature is a tricky mistress, I don't know if robots are that much more obliging. So James, if you'd like to turn on your camera and turn on your microphone and join me in the virtual room. James, I'll disappear. Very warm welcome. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much. Very kind introduction. And it's safe to say there are far more variables on a farm than there are in a robot. I mean, hopefully I can share a little bit of that with you now. Let me just put something up on screen, which hopefully everybody can see. And hopefully that's now in full screen.
It is.
Excellent. So thank you for the introduction. So I don't need to introduce myself, but for those that don't know Earth Rover, we are, as we affectionately like to say, we're lighting up the future of productive agriculture, really with our product called Claws, which is an autonomous weeding and scouting solution. That means we don't need any more chemicals on the field. We can run that really low energy, so it's zero emissions. And of course, because we're not disturbing the soil, we mean zero till. So we're saying we're enabling sustainable food. It's a product that's been in development, and the company's been around since 2017, and the product's been through various guises over those years. So I'm just going to really share a few things with you now, particularly in this forum, because we're talking about innovation with and for farmers. And I think the first thing to say is really working directly with farmers is essential with any new technology, with any new product. We're blessed. One of our co-founders is a fifth generation farmer. We're doubly blessed because his father still takes a keen interest and asks me the very difficult questions. And I have to say, answering those questions in the product or in the solution is generally heading the right direction. So the first thing to note really is you get a very clear problem statement. And if you've got a problem statement in terms of what is wrong with what, and you've also got suggestions on how to solve that problem, then you're starting down the right path, as I say. So that's an essential start to the whole process. The other good thing is they've usually got years of experience, and with 5 generations as we've got, or even with other farmers that we've worked with, they'll soon tell you what won't work because they've tried it. So I think the story from a tech development company's perspective, going on to farm and listening to the farmers and growers' challenges, I think alignment is key. And really, that's essential for success of the product and the project that you may well be working on. And that carries through. You can't really test these products, as David's just shared. You can't really test them in a lab. You need to be out on farm. You need to be in a real world setting. You need to be a real world commercial setting. So you need to see how they perform against their competition. You need to see how they perform on a massive wide open area. We've worked on everything from 2,000 hectare farms down to 16 hectare farms or a small sub 1 hectare plot, all trying to get those variables analysed and assessed. Really, the key thing there is you've got two aspects. One is to do it in a commercial setting, so you know whether it's going to work commercially or not. The other thing is, if you're working closely with a farmer, you can effectively do closed beta trials before your commercial launch. So you're not going to end up with egg on your face in any other than with the farmer you're working closely with. The risk there, of course, is farmers talk to farmers, so they will spread the word if your technology doesn't work as well. But that's generally not the case. When you work closely with a farmer, they want to help solve the problem. They'll understand what's going on with it as you're going through the development phase, come up with suggestions, or at least see that you're working to solve the problem that occurred on the field. At the end of the day, as I'll cover off in a minute, we learn from our failures, not necessarily from our successes. We're all innovators, but are we all talking the same language? It was a lovely question shared by Belinda, and I thought, yeah, how to answer that one really. It's one person's problem may not be the same as another. When we started life on the clause development, the average weed density was being portrayed as about 60 weeds a square metre. When you ask a number of growers, they've got no idea how many weeds per square metre they've got. Some of them do, some of them don't. But when you get into field testing, you suddenly find that there is a diverse range of them. And I don't know if the videos are running clearly for you, but one person on the left has 5 to 10 weeds per square metre. That's one problem. And the person on the right has an average, and this is an average of 1,000 weeds a square metre. It did reach up to 1,800, almost 2,000 weeds a square metre. So you have completely different environments. So you do have to talk to a number of different growers and ensure that we are talking about the same problem statement, because designing a solution for 5 weeds per square metre would have been a completely different solution for us designing one for 60 weeds or even 1,000 weeds a square metre. There's another element of that, really moving on to the trials protocols. And I think, again, picking up on some words that were shared with me ahead of this event, was sticking to the trials protocol is essential, even if it looks like it's all going wrong. We have a number of examples over the years that we've been through, and just one case study I'll use here was testing our AI system for its detection on weeds. Well, we didn't see this before we started the field trial. What we did see is that a lot of the weeds weren't getting killed. Previous year, there was no problem. This year, this data came from, we suddenly found there was a problem. And when we analysed the data and we looked at it, we saw, as you can see, very few green boxes around these weeds that we've got a zap, which meant on the image below, the coloured boxes are the ones we're actually targeting with the robot weeder. And it wasn't targeting any more than 20% of the overall weed density. So we found out something from that trial, from that protocol, that was a problem. We investigated it. We found out that there was a simple coding error, a simple line of code that had been swapped around. And when we reprocessed that, we found that there was a solution. And now we worked out why we weren't killing all the weeds. As you can see in the images on the right, we identified an awful lot more, and we were able to target all of those with the different robot solutions. If we'd have given up and gone home because it wasn't weeding, we wouldn't have had this data and we wouldn't have known what went wrong. As I say, you really learn from your mistakes on this front, and that's the most important part. You could also learn something new. When we did the original trials and developments, we were looking at monocot and dicot weeds as the most regular type of weeds found on the farms. But we carried on doing a test, and we found that a single shot could actually kill thistles quite effectively, something that we hadn't actually looked at before. But we continued with the trials. It kept on hitting these thistles every once in a while, and all of a sudden we realised that it was more than capable of killing a thistle as it emerged. So you may learn something positive as well as the negatives. The other part of the aspect of what we're trying to do is working with trusted partners, because it brings credibility. It brings credibility to what you do. Whether that's validating the results, and again on the left here, I have NIAB to thank for this. They did a study for Earth Rover 2 or 3 years ago, where they fired a single pulse of the light at lab environment weeds, and they confirmed that we could kill weeds in both dicotyledon and monocotyledon stage and in various sizes. That was essential in proving the basics of what we were trying to develop as a technology. And it carried a lot of weight, particularly in front of potential customers, but also in front of potential investors who wanted to take this to the next stage. Having that support, that backup, validating those results is essential. And then that leads you nicely into the next stage. And I've not picked these for any other reason, but these are real world examples. So thanks to everybody that got involved in it, but promotion and dissemination of those results and what we're trying to do comes about where you're not, I say where you least expect it, but where you want it to. So you get the publicity, you get the connection to other growers and farmers, and you get the questions come in. And in our case, we're getting an awful lot of pent-up demand for saying, when can I have one? When will it be ready? Which is excellent to know. So the networks that come through the trusted partners and the opportunity to disseminate the results of what you're developing as a technology are huge. The final part of it, how to avoid the bear traps, how to summarize all of this from a tech developer's perspective. Well, I think personally, the main ones are the problem statement needs to be clear. It needs to be the voice of the farmer or the grower. The Japanese have a wonderful way of saying this, and it's called go to Gemba. And I just add in and listen. You can go to Gemba and not listen, but the voice of the farmer has to be loud and clear, and you have to be solving that problem, because he'll certainly tell you, or she'll certainly tell you what the problem is. Engage with and involve the farmer and grower for not only just the development early stage, not just the testing, but also the trials as you go forward. You need to take that concept into reality, and you need to go from lab to field, and you need to go from field to market. So involve them at all stages of that process. Again, guidance is going to be key for there, and are you solving a real world problem that needs to be solved? And the other thing to be aware of, there are experts out there, and I'm sure the majority of them are probably on this call today. Working with the trusted partners and the experts who will analyse your technology from the right perspective is essential. Get them on board. If they're advisory board members or even investors, that's superb. That's a great way to push the company forward, because you'll always have the right voice in the board meetings and also push it in the right direction. A lot of venture capitalists don't understand how long it takes to develop technology in agriculture, for example. So you need that balance of voice to say, well, you've got one season, one shot every year, and that's it. Unless you're overseas, particularly in India, you can do 2 seasons, that's great. But the majority of UK, Europe and US are all on 1 season, 1 year. Return on investment doesn't come as fast as it does in other sectors. But you can build that network, you can effectively rely on those experts, you can rely on the trusted partners, you can rely on the network and share the knowledge and dissemination that's around. Without further ado, because I'm conscious we don't want to take up too much time and we want to leave it open to Q&A afterwards, I will finish there and thank you for your time.
James, wow, that was talk about sticking to the brief. Well done. As you said, articulate the problem statement and address it. That was fantastic. Thank you. And it was lovely to see a picture of when you were with us with Claus in the Innovation Hub. Was it last year or the year before? I think it was last year, wasn't it?
That was last year, yes.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. So lovely to see you still using the picture anyway.
Absolutely.
And I've got lots of questions. So I've got everybody who's on the call, I've got 9 questions that I've written down. So if you don't put some questions in the chat, I'm going to be firing these off at our speakers. So another call to arms. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and also introduce yourself. But James, for now, if I can invite you to turn your camera off, thank you so much, and we'll see you in a bit. So yeah, reminder, I can see there's a lot of chats and comments going on. If you haven't introduced yourself already, please do so. Please pop in any questions. I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well. So we've heard from the kind of research angle, we've heard from the tech development angle, and a few years ago, a new and very interesting and very helpful and valuable network started, the British On-Farm Innovation Network, headed up by Tom Allen-Stevens. Tom, can I invite you to join me, please? Hi, Tom. Nice to see you again.
Hello, Belinda. No, thank you very much for inviting us.
Well, we couldn't have a conversation in this context about innovating with and for farmers without including BOFIN and your vast experience on this. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to hand the talking stick to you. Tom, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And as I say, thank you very much for inviting me. I've got some slides to show, which I'll just share with you. Bear with me. Hang on. There we go. Great. Well, interestingly enough, I mean, there was a bit of a link between NIAB and James there. I've been to see James and that Earth Rover robot, and I have to say, and I wrote an article on it, which I'm very pleased to see he showed on the right-hand side in one of his pictures. And I have to say, it's absolutely mind-boggling, that robot. When you can smell your weeds frying, it's a very satisfying smell, I can tell you. But let me tell you a little bit about BOFIN. So we are the British On-Farm Innovation Network. We launched about 5 years ago, and we represent farmers who carry out on-farm trials. So my background is that I'm a farmer. I'm also a journalist. I have been a journalist for about 30 years. And as a journalist and an arable technical journalist, you only get to see the best farmers, really. And I realized that a lot of those farmers were doing their own on-farm trials. And so I thought, well, let's start a network to represent them. We've got a particular emphasis on pre-commercial tech. That's where we like to, where a lot of the members sort of share an interest, if you like, testing some of these things, just before they come to market, or even years before they come to market. And I'll say more about that in a bit. Our current membership is about 3,500. That's mainly because we've got a very large section of citizen scientists who joined us on a slug project, which I'll talk about in a bit. There's about 500 core farmer members. And we now have 70 farmers who are doing on-farm trials for us, but they're contracted to us, and we're paying them for on-farm trials. So what is farmer-led research? We always say it's for the farmer with the curious mind. It's for those farmers who, when they have a spray miss, it's not a mistake, it's a learning opportunity. One of the important aspects of what we do is the role of science. So a lot of people do on-farm trials. They will do a tramline trial, is the typical one, where you'll try a new product on a tramline, and you'll stand back at the end of the season and go, yeah, I think that one's better. And that's not scientific enough. It's not replicable. We want real data. We want, something that is going to be replicable that other farmers can learn from. We want to push the boundaries as well, co-create the tools of the fourth agricultural revolution. We are in the fourth agricultural revolution. We're living it at the moment. It should be farmer-led. And we want to actually, be at the vanguard of the revolution. We've got a culture of sharing as well. So, one of the important things that I'll come back to time and time again, and if you take away nothing else from this, knowledge has value. It is a really, really important part of what we do. And I think farmers underestimate the amount of knowledge they have. But it only has value if you share it. And that's the important aspect of what we do. And as I say, the other important thing is that we believe that there should be payment for on-farm trials. If you do this innovation, if you share the knowledge, it is a public benefit. You are benefiting other farmers, often more than you're benefiting yourself. And so there should be payment for that. And that's what we very much campaign for. So I come back to this phrase, knowledge has value. If you think about it, who has taken on the great innovations through farming in farming's history? And it's usually been farmers. And if you think about, Jethro Tull with the seed drill, for example, Turnip Townsend and the four-course rotation, farmers have usually taken on these innovations and they've started them in the field. And then I've got Norman Borlaug on the right-hand side there. And I'm not entirely sure whether Norman was the last of the great farming innovators or the first of the non-farming innovators. But after the war, it kind of stopped. We didn't do the innovating anymore. It was we handed over the innovators to other scientists, to other people to do it on farm, we kind of relinquished the responsibility to do it, and we handed it over to other scientists, other innovators, other tech innovators, and so on. And we stopped innovating on farm. And what then happened? So the innovations were done for us. On our behalf, and we then brought it back onto the farm in a sack or in a can. So knowledge, we're no longer innovating on farm. We brought it back onto the farm, and we just became experts in spreading the inputs that we then that we were buying onto farm. We were no longer actually doing the innovating, understanding the knowledge, and so on. So, innovations weren't done at a farm level, by farmers. It was done by big industry. And innovation becomes a multi-billion-dollar product launch at that stage, and we are just the servants to it, the slaves to it almost, because when the product stops working, what do? We cry to these people and say, give us another product, we need it, and of course, and then it comes along with a huge premium that we were very, very happy to pay. So it shouldn't be like that. We should be at the forefront of the innovation. We should be very much co-developing it. Is where we're coming from. So we've now got 4 DEFRA-funded projects that we're leading. It's a total value of about £12.5 million, and we're working in slugs. We're working in soils on the Truth project, then in pulses on nitrogen climate smart project, and also in gene edited crops, which is a new exciting project that we're working in. And I'm just going to touch on certain aspects of some of the projects that we're in. So first of all, slug resistant wheat. This is where we started from, actually, and this came about. This was really interesting. So I went to a meeting, a Widgeon meeting at Rothamsted. And I was talking to some scientists. They were looking at the Watkins lines. So these are old wheats. It's a collection of about 1,000 wheats that John Innes Centre has. And they've been looking at the genetics of it and trying to find interesting traits that perhaps have been lost in modern wheats. And they found this one wheat called Watkins 788 that came from Turkestan, I believe. Hasn't been grown for 100 years. They've been put it through feeding trials and found that slugs consistently spurned it. And I was talking to scientists involved, and they said, well, this is great, the lab work, but it's not until you actually bring it out into the field that that slugs will actually resist it for sure. And I said, oh, this is great. This is just what I'd just been starting up Boffin at the time. We only had 150 members. And they said, oh, farmers won't want to grow this. It'll grow it grows far too tall. It'll flop over. It won't yield. Farmers won't be interested. And I said, well, I'll put it to my farmers and we'll see. So I did. I emailed everybody, and 30 of them came back and said, really, really interested in this. When can we start trialing it? So I went back to the researchers, and they said, oh, we've only got 42 grams of seed. But on the back of that, they multiplied up the seed, and we started the trial 3 years ago. We're now in the 3rd year of trials, and we've got some really interesting findings from it. So that was, I ought to say, that was initially it was work funded by the Environment Agency, lovely Environment Agency. It was John Innes Centre, as I say, where the wheat was multiplied up, and they did the lab work initially. And we've been working with Keith Walters from Harper Adams University, who's a great expert in slug behaviour. And we're now getting some really interesting results from it. We're not anywhere near yet proper slug-resistant wheat, but there is something in it. And that's the thing. We'd never have known that had it not been for farmers who showed an interest. And these were the initial farmers that we got involved. And the way we did the trials is that we gave them all the resources to enable them to do the actual work in the field. And that's the important thing about the work that we do. The farmers do the monitoring, and we give them the tools to enable them to do it on farm with their own farm resources. And that will include doing a trial plan as well. So you can see in the top right hand corner there, the trial plan that we had in the third year. And we've moved on a bit from that trial plan that I'll show you in a minute. But the other aspect of getting farmers involved in trials is that you get the weird and the wonderful, and you get the things that normal trials professionals wouldn't come forward with. So, for example, just on the right-hand side there, this is Graham Potter up in Yorkshire, who now the thing about Watkins 788 is it grows like stink. And so you don't want to plant it too early. And we said to all the farmers, don't plant it before the end of September. So Graham, being Graham, said, no, that doesn't work for me. I'm going to plant it 20th of September, along with all the rest of my wheat. So he did. It grew like stink. And by April, it was beginning to flop over in his field. And we all said, Graham, we told you so. And he said, no matter. And so he went in and he with his topper and he cut half of the plot. And bear in mind, this seed hadn't been grown anywhere in the world for 100 years. This was the only few plots in the country, and Graham decided to just put a topper through it. You know, on the face of it, absolute sacrilege, but fascinating trial actually, because it grew up, and actually that area yielded more than the area just next door that he left and had completely flopped down. So we learned, I mean, didn't tell us anything about slugs, I might say. We also learnt a lot about beetles as well. And that was the other interesting thing. In the first year of the trials, it was a very dry year. You may remember 2022, I think it was. It was a very dry year, and we didn't have any slugs, but we had loads of beetles. And that really triggered an interest in our farmers to say, well, look, just what contribution are the beetles making to the slugs? And so in the following year, we did a beetle trial on the back of that. So two very interesting aspects of getting involved with farmers. That's what you get. But there was some, you know, one thing that we did find in that first year, actually, although we didn't have any slugs, but we did have good data that came back from the farmers. The comment back from Keith was that it was up to the publishable standard you would expect from a professional trials technician. And the other aspect of that we actually delivered the research for about a third of the cost of using research staff. And we've taken that on now in the Slimers project. And the slug-resistant wheat is now an aspect of the Slimers project. And all of the trial work within Slimers is done by our 30 slug sleuths. We've got 6 sites now doing slug-resistant wheat within that. And the trial plan, as I say, has moved on. We've got a proper replicated randomized block trial that we're doing. And again, this has been very much honed with farmers. And so it's done with it has to be a trial that can be done with a standard farm drill and done by a farmer, you know, rather than with a trial plot drill. And so the design of the plot and everything about it has to fit with a farm system. The other thing is getting a proper trial plan, getting it monitored and everything. So in the first year, we asked farmers to rate their plot on a score of 1 to 10. But of course, one person's 2 is another person's 5, so that didn't work. The next year, we asked everybody to take photos of the plot. So we got all sorts of lovely pictures of nice scenery, of the deer in the running through the field, of slugs in a pot, not actually the crop that what we wanted. So we're now trying we've got quadrats set out in the field, and they all of our farmers have quadrats, and at each time when they monitor the plots, they take pictures, and we're now using that as the basis of an AI model that we're going to be incorporating into our app to actually understand you know, what the growth of the plots are. So that's another great sort of learning experience, if you like. Just going to talk a little bit about truth, which is thriving roots underpinning total soil health. This is a study that we're looking at trying to understand the relationship between soil and roots. We know so much about what happens above the ground. This is about what's going on below the ground and the interaction between the soil microbes, the mycorrhizal fungi, and the roots. And some really interesting aspects of this. I won't go into too much detail on this, but we have in all of our communities and all the projects that we run, we have at the heart of it in this case, the root rangers, the farmers who are actually doing the trials. And we need to get the information out into the innovation community, which should include the early adopters. And the way we do it is with what we call the soil circle. And anyone can join the soil circle, but it's particularly for those people with an interest in this area. So it can be farmers who are particularly interested in the soil, or it can be scientists who have got some experience in it, who've got something to share. And it's about sharing that knowledge within that community. And we've got our communities set up on the farming forum, so we can have discussions on there as well. Unique places on the farming forum. It's a safe place to share your knowledge and for that knowledge to be valued. And we keep those areas sort of separate from the rest of the forum, if you like. Within this, we've got three main things that we're looking at within the field. So we're taking soil cores and working with University of Nottingham, and then they go through CT analysis. So we get a really nice 3D picture, which I'll show you in a minute, of a soil root. We're also taking microbial analysis and focusing particularly on the rhizosphere, the sheath around the root. And then we're looking at mycorrhizal fungi and the relationship there, and I'll touch on a bit more on that in a minute. And then all the farmers follow a trial plan, and then within there where they're taking their specific samples at specific points in the field that they record and they come back to, they're also all testing a particular product in their field as well, and it's up to them what they want to test. But typically there are a lot of these biostimulants that make great claims about what they're doing for rooting, or systems like the Johnson-Su system, where there are a lot of claims made about the Johnson-Su compost tea system, and our farmers are interested to know whether that does actually work in practice. And so they're using the tools that we've got within this platform to help them do that. What we're also doing is making quick and easy in-field measurements. So obviously, with these soil cores and things, and the testing that we're doing, the analysis, it's prohibitively expensive for most farmers. But what we want to do is give them the tools to do that, but also in the field, quick and easy in-field tools. So we've got the PES sensor, for example, that we're calibrating for microbial analysis. And we're also using shovelomics, which is a method of, a lot of researchers use this as a method to study roots. And so we're introducing that as a method for farmers to understand the structure of their roots and the health of their roots as well. And they get the benefit of seeing it with these high granular systems, but also these quick and in-field systems. And this is just a picture. Hopefully this video will play all right for you. A picture of the roots that you get. I mean, it's a really nice detailed picture, but also all of the porosity. You'll see the blue areas that come up on the right-hand side there. That's the pores within the soil. So you can get a really good a 3D idea of what your soil looks like. That's what we're doing within it. And then looking at nitrification rates. The really interesting aspect of this is the nitrification bacteria that gets to work in the soil when you put nitrogen on. And of course, if that's working too fast, too hard, then you lose a lot of your nitrogen before the plants can take it up. And the interesting aspect about that is that we've got a couple of wheats within the project that have got biological nitrification inhibition, so they can actually regulate the nitrogen in the soil. Now, as far as I know, they're the only wheats, natural wheats in the world that have this ability, and we're multiplying them up, and we're going to be introducing them in the third year of the trial. Just a couple of words about mycorrhizal fungi. One of the things that we're doing is measuring the mycorrhizal fungi. One of the things that we found out this year was unidentified foreign objects that are in the roots. So mycorrhizal fungi, sorry, I'll just go back to the previous slide. You can see there on the right-hand side, it's a symbiosis that plants have had, and most plants have this relationship with fungi in the soil, and the fungi passes nutrients to the plant, and the plant passes down sugars and lipids, which the fungi turns into carbon. And so, it's a fantastic symbiotic relationship. It's totally controlled by the plant, and the plant will only switch it on if it needs nutrients. And you can imagine if we're feeding it nitrogen the whole time, of course, we're not switching that relationship on. But there's so little we actually understand about that relationship. And Crop Science Centre, there are some experts there, Tom Thurkel and his team, who we've been working with, and they're very keen to understand more about it, which is why they came to us as farmers. But we're all learning all the time, and so this is something that we found this year, these interesting new, could they be endophytes within the plant? We just don't know at the moment, and this is something that has come from this farmer-led project. And as I say, one of the other aspect that we're developing through the trial is we're multiplying up these wheats. The Watkins 238 and Watkins 580 have got this biological nitrification inhibition that we're going to be introducing in the third year of the trial. Also, a couple of Durham wheats, Rosello and Capelli, that have got a very interesting root on them. And so we're going to be developing those, growing those alongside elite wheats in the field to see what the difference is. And we're putting that through.
Please, Tom, okay. 2 minutes.
Right, I'm just going to quickly skip through. We did a really interesting project on soil fungal communities, and this is just to show you the range of mycorrhizal fungi that you get, right from 5% up to 69%, much higher than Tom Thurkel thought. This was working with about 42 farmers across the country. Tom thought that the range would be about 20% to 40%. So this was a really interesting finding as far as that was concerned. We also looked at the effect of farming system, although the organic performed best, we had a very small sample size, but you can see that regenerative farming works well, and direct drilling is very beneficial for soils. But interestingly enough, plough-based systems, you would have thought you would destroy the fungus with the plough. It's a very small sample, and they were all organic. And I think that's the important thing there, that you can plough as long as your soil is good and healthy. The varieties changed. So we did the same sort of test on the KWS variety plots. And Palladium doesn't think it needs AMF, is the expression that Tom came up with. For example, cover crops. We had some interesting results from cover crops there. The cover crops increase AMF by about 3 times. Very interesting findings. I'll just skip. This is Rachel and Jacob, who were looking at Johnson Sioux bioreactor and the compost tea from it. And they found that the biological activity, they simply weren't sure whether it was making any difference at all. But they now know that the biological activity is very much higher thanks to the Johnson Sioux. You can get involved through the. I'm not going to talk very much about the NCS because I've run out of time. But one thing that we are looking at, you get very detailed. We work with the ADAS-YEN on this, so you get very detailed reports back from that. And we're looking at nutrient analysis. I'm not going to talk about the probity thing either. But just to finish off, I did want to talk about Adopt, which has been mentioned a couple of times already, which is the new opportunity to get involved. Now, I know that I saw the name Andrew Maclay is on the call here, who's the godfather of Adopt, really. He has been the designer of it. So I'm not going to say too much about it, but it is a brilliant scheme. We are so thrilled that government has decided to fund it. £20.6 million that they're putting into it, which is half of what they promised, but never mind, at least it's something. And it's a really great opportunity for farmers to get involved in research and to bring researchers together. The great thing is you must get a project manager involved in it, and that's where we come in, and we'd be delighted to help you with any projects that you'd like to bring forward. And we're looking for ideas. We're looking for farmers to come forward with ideas, and we can help you get the funding to take those forward. There's also the Farming Innovation Programme. All of our projects are part of the Farming Innovation Programme. That's been on hold, but there's now more opportunities coming up this year. So really great opportunities to get involved in all sorts of aspects of farm trials.
I'm going to have to wind you up.
Here are the things that you can do. So do get in touch. Thank you very much. Sorry to go over.
Thank you, Tom. And we will be, if the speakers are happy with this is being recorded, so you will have access to the speakers and the content afterwards. So thank you, Tom, and a very important and valuable organisation in the innovation ecosystem for agriculture. Can I invite James and David to turn their cameras on and join Tom and I, please? Thank you, David. Nice to see you. I think you fell off a cliff at the end of your talk, so nice to see you back. And you feel free to put your mics on when you're ready. So let's have a bit of a wider discussion about this. I have to confess to a bit of a personal passion on this. My Nuffield Scholarship was about improving communication between farmers and innovators, because even 150 years ago, when I did my Nuffield, this still felt like a bit of a challenge. And so I guess one of the first questions is about how much do scientists need to know about farming, and how much do farmers need to know about the kind of scientific research methodology? David, maybe if I can start with you. I mean, farmers don't need to know enough to publish in science papers, right? And scientists don't need to be able to run a farm. But where's that balance between knowing enough about each other's worlds?
It's a difficult one to start. I suppose from our point of view, in terms of the membership side of things, certainly for NIAB, it's very much the farmers tell us what they want to know, and therefore we then have that, as Tom says, the facilities and the resources, the plot combines, the drills to then actually help them answer that. It is not so much us telling them what we think the research should be done. It's very much the members feeding back to us what they feel they want to know, or they can't find the information independently elsewhere. Whereas I suppose some of the more technical work, certainly some of the work we're doing around sort of environmental schemes on the back of elms, those sorts of things that potentially we're delivering for other clients, that's more us going to farmers and saying, look, we're looking for ways to test these ideas, these innovations, these models, whatever it might be. This is how they work. Do you think you could help us? So I think it varies very much from the very applied, that we're just facilitators and help them answer those questions, to actually we a bit more pushing on what we think we should be doing, and therefore we just need someone that can help us do that.
Sure. I don't know if Tom and James, either of you have any comments on that point.
Yes, I mean that's really where we work, so managing the expectations of the scientists on one end and the farmer on the other, and there's a sweet spot in between. So the scientists, I mean, David will know this, you work in confidence areas of sort of 95 to 98%. For a farmer, if it's anything above 50%, that's fine. That's I'm confident to go ahead with that. And so, as I say, what we're trying to do is get the farmers to raise their confidence level, through greater replication and so on. And actually, David illustrated it really well in one of his slides when he was talking about the difference between a small plot trial and a tramline trial. And we're trying to raise the replication value of a tramline trial, but not to the extent that farmers are spending all day trying to just apply one input to their trial. The farmers are busy people. You've got to be able to do something that you can manage within the everything else that's going on the farm. And so it's finding that balance. And we do that. A lot of our work is around designing protocols that can actually be practically applied on farm, but will give you the scientific replication that you need.
Interesting. James, anything to add?
Just that you need the collaboration and the balance really to reinforce that point. And if you think about the problem statement at the front end comes from the farmer, the early research levels, pre-TRL4, let's say, technology readiness level, always goes on in some very good universities and institutions. But then how do you take it beyond the lab into the field? And then at the other end of that scale, make it commercially viable and satisfy that original problem statement from the farmer. So you've got to have a balance of all aspects in all of those areas in that range.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to come to Susanna's question, then I'm going to come to Laura's question. But Susanna Bolton in the chat has rightly pointed out that if you have farmer-led and problem-focused approaches, one of the challenge is that a farmer problem might not be so easy to translate into a clearly defined research question. So Susanna's asking, what are your approaches for arriving at this crucial first step? Tom, do you want to kick off with that one, and then maybe David and James?
Yes. No. Thanks for that, Susanna. So yes, the farmer problem does not translate easily into a clearly defined research question. What are your approaches for arriving at this? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm just trying to think of an example of where that's come through. I probably need. Would you mind? I don't know if anyone else has got a comment on this. I just probably need a couple of minutes to think about a good answer to that. Would that be okay?
Okay, shall we? I don't know if David and James have got any immediate comments. Well, Tom is.
Yeah, I suppose sort of some of the things that we've been testing on farm have always been, although the technology behind it, some of the modelling work I've been doing is quite complex. We always then, when we get to a point on farm, is just try and keep it as simple as possible. And the first thing we look for is what is our control. So, you know, is that just doing nothing? Are we happy with what we're doing, but we think there's a better option, or is our actual question is what we're doing working in the first place? So I think our first step would also be what are we trying to prove? Are we trying to prove that this new thing is better than our old thing, or are we trying to prove that our old thing doesn't work in the first place and therefore we need a new thing? So I suppose that's the first, not really answer the question, but I think definitely start with, you know, what's the control, and then think, well, actually, what of these innovations, what of these technologies, what of these problems, or what are the solutions out there that might help us with that, control or against that issue, and then look at them individually or as a subset of ones. But I suppose that's where we start, certainly for the on-farm tramline trials, is just what are we trying to compare against?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Just to come back on that, Belinda, I think, you know, with us, I'd like to take the illustration of slug-resistant wheat again. You know, that when we had a real challenge when we first started looking at this to know how on earth would we actually be able to tell whether this wheat, whether there was any difference in the field. And we thought of all sorts of ways of doing it when we were first working with John Innocenter about how we can monitor slugs and monitor slug activity. And, you know, one of the things we didn't know was, well, how far does a slug travel in a year? Will it just exit the patch if you don't make the patch big enough? How will we know whether the damage is down to slugs and things like that? And that's when we brought Keith on board and his expertise, Keith Walters, and his expertise on slug behaviour. And it was working with him, with our farmers, that we got to that sort of crucial first step of actually working out, well, what is the you know, how do we actually know whether this wheat, how are we actually going to find out from the slug behavior whether this wheat behaves any differently from a normal wheat? And it's been quite a sort of iterative process, I think. But, you know, we're quite confident that we've got a system now that tests that in the field. So I hope that answers the question. But anyway,
I think so. Thank you, Tom. James, do you have any reflections on that question?
Yeah, just to add a couple of points, and at the risk of sounding like a consultant, you know, you need a lot of blue sky thinking sometimes. So you need to say, you know, okay, so what's the bigger picture? What is really going on with population growth, climate change, and how can we address that in this particular sector? Not many of those will come from a direct problem statement, because you're not solving a problem on your day-to-day challenges, whether suddenly got frost overnight you weren't expecting, or rain, or pest has appeared. So some of those things do need a network forum. I mean, Boffin's obviously a good example, and NIAB and Agri TechE create these forums so people can actually discuss and chat around those areas and generate those ideas. That's going to happen. So I think in terms of narrowing it down to a clearly defined research question, a lot of it will come from discussions like that with farmers and technologies they've tried or failed with, and bringing it back to the same old question of what is wrong with what, and then if you do come up with an idea, what is the problem to which it is the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. And see, Daniel's just put in the chat, the question is, what works on a farm? And I think, Tom, you said 50% looks pretty good. I remember we did an event years ago called How Good is Good Enough? Because I guess, we all agree that farmers are innovators as well, and are doing experiments year on year. A farmer's career is a long-term experiment. And how much evidence do you need in order to change practice? I'm just going to go now to Laura's question. Tom, on your point about payment for farm trials, this is interesting. If a farmer's been supporting technology development and that input leads to successful launch to market and commercialization, how does a farmer benefit from that? Do they get sweat equity? Should they get sweat equity? And then maybe James, if you could come in on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, and that is one of the things that this is why farmers, pioneering farmers, need a voice, because that element isn't recognised, and it's often the farmer in the field who, if you take the precision farming example, it's those farmers who are sitting there when the precision farming technology first came in, and they're struggling to get the sprayer to talk to the box of tricks, to talk to the satellite, and they're losing valuable hours in the field trying to get this thing to work, on the phone to the person, and it's the work and the time that they put in at their own cost that has made the technology work. And so it's usually the next people who come along who benefit from it, and that's why it's really important that farmers get that recognition and get the value from the work that they do, and that it is recognized and valued. The other thing about this is that there's no first mover advantage in farming. That, going back to your point, that they don't get an equity, they don't get a share in the equity, they don't get a share in the IP in it either. And I don't think, not many of our farmers actually seek that. And it's quite a rare instance where you do get that share of equity. What we're actually looking to gain for our farmers is the knowledge in those new technologies. And so that's why it's important for farmers to be involved in the technology right from the very early stages, the TRL of 3 and 4, and co-develop it so that you can co-develop the knowledge, so that when actually it does come to commercialization, the knowledge is already there. But the important thing is the knowledge is owned by farmers rather than by some big ag tech company who launched the product, with a big fanfare and a big premium, but no knowledge about how it's done, or the only knowledge that they've got is the knowledge that they hand down to farmers, that farmers then hone in their own systems and work out themselves how it works. It should be the other way around. It should be farmers being involved right at the outset. How you then share in the IP, I don't think there is a model that does that. But if you can share in the knowledge, that is an important first step, so that when it gets to market, the knowledge is already in the farming community and already owned by farmers as to how they put it into place.
Okay, thank you. James, from the other end of the spectrum, from a tech developer, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously for adoption of technology, there are grant schemes and supporting programs under the Innovate, and obviously Adopt, we're hoping, is going to do that sort of thing. So it will be a shared risk approach funded by other bodies. But the reality is none of those are without risk. Somebody's got to be the first mover, but some will take advantage of that first move, and they'll take it early. Because we've got a farmer on the board and a co-founder, Obviously, there's the equity-based benefits from it. So if the company is a success, and I know there was a number of farmers who invested in another robotics company who unfortunately isn't still with us, but that's the risk that is taken. But if it is a success and there is equity in the business, then obviously it's shared benefit across the board. Always a good way to do it. But the key challenge, I think, is taking it through that path and getting it to successful commercial launch and being the first mover adopter, but with support. We're conscious that we don't want, there are a few companies out there who are selling at high cost, high value, early stage prototypes, and then coming out with a cheaper option next year or year after. And of course that upsets the people who are the early adopters because they paid premium price for the development. We're exactly. Conscious we're not going to do that to our growers. You know, we're doing it as a beta pilot stage at a price point that we believe we can get to market with. So it's a shared risk from our perspective. But those beta pioneers, we will look after, obviously, throughout their career with us, if you call it a career, by getting the earliest updates possible as we improve the technology as it goes forward. So there are ways to give, I think, give back, if you like, for supporting the technology development as we go on farm.
Interesting. I'd like to stay with you, James, if I may. You said something about that learning from your failures more than from your successes. And I once heard a lovely phrase that people learn more from your messes than from your successes. Do you think, and this is a question for all of you, that the system, let's call it, actually favours, sort of disincentivizes people from talking about what didn't work? And Tom, you gave some very nice examples where there was some sort of unexpected results. Do you think because of the way the kind of funding system works that you're encouraged to shout about your successes and we all sort of quietly forget about our messes? And are we missing a trick there? Because is there some valuable learning that nobody likes to admit to? What are your thoughts on that, James?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. There is let's just say, a culture in terms of in the investment in these organisations, these companies, that needs to see success. You need to see that. You need to shout about that to attract further investment and carry it through. That's a misunderstanding in the investment community because the reality is things fail. Things will have to fail to improve. If it's right first time, we'd all be successful billionaires and we'd all be doing other things probably in a lot of cases. So it's a tricky one. You know, I think being open and honest is the key part of it. You know, we've just last season, the best example I've got is we had a series of failures on field. We found the root cause of those problems. We solved it. Yes, by the end of the season, we might have run out of time to do a full trial there, but we then moved to a test facility in Spain so we could prove it out through winter and verify it's ready for spring this year. Working with at least one particular grower by doing that approach, he's our first beta pioneer customer. Signed up, happy to be involved with it. So, yeah, sometimes openness and honesty is better for your sales rather than just selling the positives just to get the investment in. Sure.
And David, I guess as a researcher, you declare the outcomes, whether they're what people wanted to hear or not. So I guess from a research perspective, you could be a bit more candid about learnings or alternative outcomes.
Yes, particularly the membership work and the AHCB work and the Innovate work. Those sorts of funding streams, whatever we find is reported. Obviously, commercial companies who don't have the facilities to do their own trials can come to us and say, can you test this for me, and we'll just give the results back to them, and then it's up to them obviously how they use their results, but they can't obviously use our name or we will certainly say if they change the results to how we found them. So yeah, we're very much an independent organisation that will report what we find regardless of how we got to that. Obviously it's important that we follow the standards and ISO and all those sorts of things that come with that. But yeah, okay, all part of your credibility.
Tom, uncharacteristically, I'm going to give you the last word. Could you keep it quite brief because the clock is against us?
Okay, well, in our game, in farmer-led research, there is no mess. It's just an alternative success. So everything has a successful outcome, and it's up to the farmer to decide where it goes. And that's the joy of a farmer-led trial, you know, you're not really worried whether something is a success or a failure, because that's not what you're doing. You're trying to understand more, and where the research goes is where it takes you. The important thing is the so what about the trial that you're doing. So you're getting all this data through. What does it actually mean? And that's where, you know, where we're really working with our farmers to try to so that they can understand better all of the data that they get back in, what it actually means to them on farm.
Yeah, fantastic. As Bill Clarke, latterly of NIAB, used to say, how's tomorrow going to be different as a result of what you've learned today? And that's a line that I think we all should stick to. I can see the clock is against us, so I think we're going to have to wrap up there. This is a topic I could talk about for the rest of the day, but I guess you've all got other things to do. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Christina has just put in the chat the events programme that we've got for the rest of the year. If you enjoyed this, there's much more where that came from. We've got an early bird discount for our REAP conference that's open for a few more days. This is all about Connections Week, so if there are any connections that you would like to make either from today's webinar or indeed across the ecosystem and you're a member, that is exactly part of your membership, and we know that that's one of the most highly valued elements of Agri TechE membership. So please keep connecting. It's lovely to see you all this afternoon. Thank you again, David, James and Tom. Really appreciate you giving up your afternoon to be part of today's event, and can I wish you an enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.